Jillian Day is here this month, and I don't even have to ask you what you're going to talk about. We have it right behind you in a sign,
Yeah.
prescribed burnings. But before we get into that, I always ask you, what is your official job title and role with the department?
I am a biologist. I work out of the Hammond office. I work on private lands and wildlife management areas throughout this region. So anything from basically West Feliciana down to Plaquemines Parish, we cover out of our office.
And we're going to talk a lot about prescribed burning today, but I'm assuming you cover more than that. If it's
Yeah.
Is it anything related to private land?
Yeah, pretty much anything related to private lands, and we have 9 WMAs throughout this region, and most diverse habitat types that you can think of, anywhere from a coastal marsh up to an upland hardwood forest such as Tunica Hills. So we cover a broad variety of ecosystems and habitat types.
Got it. Today we're talking about the prescribed burning, as the sign states, and I think a lot of people may drive down the interstate and see this and wonder, who's burning a bunch of land, and actually may not realize that it's actually planned. So just broadly, talk about prescribed burning and what it is.
Okay, so prescribed burning essentially is a planned ignited fire that is managed by professional fire managers. And for us as land managers, it's one of the most cost-efficient habitat, large-scale habitat management tools that we have. So we utilize this a lot at Sandy Hollow Wildlife Management Area, which some people might be familiar with, especially in this area. Lake Ramsey is one of those as well. So
why is it important to manage habitat in this way?
All right, there's a lot of habitats, especially around here. It historically used to be longleaf pine habitat, which evolved with fire being present. Whether it was set by lightning, Native Americans, that ecosystem is extremely diverse, mainly because of that prescribed fire. So removing that fire, over the last 100 years or so, we've seen fire suppression efforts, which remove fire off the landscape. And as we've seen that occur, we've seen it convert to more of a monoculture type habitat type, more commercial, such as loblolly pine. So you remove the diversity off the landscape.
Why is it needed?
Well, it promotes diversity. You can remove, one of the main things, it removes fuel off the landscape, which reduces the severity of wildfires. It can control disease, such as brown spot in the brush stage or the grass stage of longleaf pine. And it also promotes native vegetation, which is extremely beneficial to the wildlife populations.
Excuse me. So it's sort of ironic. Sometimes you need to burn things to get them to grow a certain way or to behave a certain way.
And a lot of people view fire as a bad thing. They see negative, parts of that. A lot of people, Smokey the Bear, they always told you to put out the fire, things like that. But fire is extremely important to certain ecosystems. And when you remove that fire, those ecosystems disappear. So it's extremely important in certain ecosystems to maintain that disturbance caused by fire.
This question may take too long to answer. How do you control it? How do you keep it from going in an area that it's not supposed to?
So for us on our wildlife management areas, we have thousands of acres that we typically manage. So we break those up into smaller units that we can manipulate a little bit easier. So we have equipment such as tractors, plows, things like that. So we'll plow a fire line around those smaller units. That controls the fire, keeps it, in check. And so as we burn, we know which side, which line to light first, depending on what the winds are doing. So we'll maintain that boundary. We'll check it periodically as we burn, just to make sure nothing jumps across into a unit that hasn't been burned yet. So we try to keep it into a smaller enclosed area, just so we don't have those larger, dramatic wildfires that cause a lot of damage.
It just takes lots and lots of people.
It does. It takes a lot of manpower, a lot of time. So,
is there a set number of people, or does it depend on the size of the burn?
It really depends on the size of the burn, how many acres we're trying to burn that day. So if we're burning a couple units at a time, and we try to keep it patchy just to, create even more diversity on the landscape. So it depends on how many units and what the weather is doing for that day, if those units are even burnable to begin with that given weather condition. So it just depends on how many acres we're trying to burn for that day.
Is there any sort of planning you have to do with the wildlife in the area, or do they typically get out? Or most animals smart enough to see fire and go?
They're smart enough to see it and move on, and they're capable of running, flying, things of that nature. Certain things we do take into account when we have dormant season and growing season burns. During those growing season burns, we try to push it back later into the spring to avoid the peak nesting period for those ground nesting bird species.
Got it. Is there a certain time of year when burning typically occurs?
Yeah, you can technically burn year-round, but for us, it really depends on what your management strategy is. So we break ours into dormant season burns and growing season burns. So for a growing season burn, for instance, if we have one of those units that sees hardwood encroachment, those hardwoods are more susceptible to a burn during the growing season. So we'll burn those units during the growing season to set those back to release some of the grasses and herbaceous vegetation. So it really depends on what your management objective is.
I ask about the management or making sure it doesn't spread. Does the same apply to smoke? It has to do with wind and a lot of those variables?
Yeah, for smoke management, it really begins before you even start the fire. So for us, those units that I was speaking of earlier, we have management prescribed burn plans for those units. And when we make those plans, we identify the surrounding sensitive areas before we even start the burn. So hospitals, schools, nursing homes, things like that. So we look for the ideal conditions with the wind directions that are going to keep the smoke off of those areas. Ideally, you want unstable atmosphere where the smoke will rise up, transport winds that will take it away. So the smoke management aspect of it starts before the fire is even started.
So who actually does prescribe burning? And again, do certain people light the fire? Do certain people have other jobs? And get into some of that, if you will.
Okay, so typically, it's a lot of liability is associated with prescribed burning. So for us, our crews that do our burning on our wildlife management areas have years of experience, and our guys are certified prescribed burners through Louisiana Department of Ag and Forestry. And so with each burn, we'll have a prescribed burn boss that goes out and makes sure the crews are all on the same page and are following that burn plan that we've already written out for that day. We also have contractors that are out there that are licensed as well and permitted as well to do that you can contract and hire to come out to burn your property. We've also seen, private property owners themselves go get certified, receive the training and education, and go out and actually burn for themselves. But I will warn you, wind can change at any point in time, so you need to have the knowledge and equipment and be able to respond to any kind of situation that might be thrown your way.
Does it take a long time to get that license? Is it a day, a week, a month, a year?
Typically, it's about a 2-day class where you're hardcore taking classes, learning different things that can happen, weather, all of that is involved. There's a field day where you actually go out and try to burn, weather dependent, of course. And then you have to be a burn boss on, I believe it's 3 burns before you can actually get your certification. But that's all done through Ag and Forestry.
Yeah, so it's, even though you're a private landowner, it's probably, if you're a business owner and have other duties, you probably don't want to, want to leave it to the experts.
Yeah, it's probably for the best. Not to say that you can't go out and do it yourself, but it's probably for the best to leave it to those that know what they're doing.
Are most or all of the burns on private land? Do you ever do it on public land? Is it necessary?
Yes, for us as an agency, most of our burning is done on our wildlife management areas. Yeah. Sandy Hollow is one of our bigger ones. It's a longleaf pine ecosystem that requires fire. So most of our burning is done there. Lake Ramsey, of course, is another one as well. So for us as an agency, we conduct prescribed burning on our property, and it's up to the landowner on private property to get that done on their property.
Talk about some of the programs through the department that are available to landowners. You may have mentioned that they can get trained, but is there other direct help outside of what you've already talked about? Yeah,
so we have several regional offices throughout the state. They can call our agency at any time, speak to one of our private lands biologists. We'll offer any kind of guidance that we can. If a landowner feels that their property is suitable for burning, we can talk them through the steps of the application process for PBI, which is the Prescribed Burn Initiative, which is a cost share program. So we'll walk them through the steps of the application process, and those properties are ranked based on certain criteria. And those that rank higher would potentially qualify for assistance for that year for prescribed burning on their private property. And as always, they can always contact us, and we'll offer technical assistance or management plans, anything of that nature.
Gotcha. So we got another minute or two, and anytime there's props, we may stop and look at some of them. Obviously, this is gear.
Yeah.
Now, does everyone on site need to wear the helmet and or the hard hat and the glasses, the goggles, and the gloves? And we have a shirt, but it's not on screen.
Yeah, we have safety gear. All of our guys and crew members wear, their safety gear. They have their hard hats, should anything fall, limbs, things of that nature, because a lot of times you may have to cut some trees, things like that. Gloves to protect your hand from the fire, splinters, things like that you might come across. Some goggles that keeps anything out of your eyes, the ashes, soot. We do have some clothing, a pants and a shirt that will keep, the fire is flame retardant, so that keeps them safe from that. Typically leather boots or something that's flame retardant as well.
I was going to ask you what this was.
Yeah, this is a drip torch. Actually, the drip part of it is turned upside down in this can right now, but you would fill this up with whatever your fuel would be for the fire for that day, and it drips out the end, and that's what you go down dripping, lighting the fire with. So that's our mechanism for lighting the fire.
Well, really, is this dangerous? I mean, can it?
It can be, but the way it's set up, it just slowly drips fire out, so it's not. And the fuels that we use a combination. It's typically a mixture of diesel and gas, so you don't have that very flammable gas. You have it mixed with diesel, so it's usually a nice little mixture that just provides a nice little slow drip of fire along the line. So.
Gotcha. And I know that most people have seen these. Is there any rhyme or reason to where these go? I mean, obviously near a prescribed burn, but do you put a certain amount out to warn people as to what's going on, or how does that work?
We try to put them on our main access roads, those main roads that are going to be maybe impacted by some of that smoke before it has a chance to rise and get up out of the area. So we try to make sure, like the highways and things like that we put these signs up just to give people a little bit of a heads up to use some caution. It's almost like driving through fog, so you kind of want to be prepared just to give them some warning before they get to it.
Good, that's very interesting. Anything we missed? Anything you'd like to add about this program?
It's very important. Like I said earlier, I know a lot of people see fire in a negative way, but it's really important. Fire historically was a part of the landscape for thousands of years. And over the last 100 years or so, we've seen fire suppression efforts that kind of have removed that from the landscape. And with that, we've kind of seen a shift more towards these monoculture stands and habitat types. So it's really important to maintain it on the landscape just to keep that diversity out there, because our wildlife extremely benefit from a diverse habitat. So.
Really, really interesting. Well, good luck on future burns, and
Yes,
thanks
sir.
for coming in and sharing this with us, Jillian. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.
All right.